Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan is away on military leave right now, so we're going to bring back some of our previous shows that didn't make it to the podcast. We hope that you enjoy them. As always, we welcome your feedback. If you'd like a written transcript of the show, please email me at Karen, Karen, .cox, COX, at mail, mail.wvu.edu, or call 304-234-3673. Thanks again for listening.
All right, so last week we talked about cover crops, and we touched on how you can use a cover crop to get rid of some potentially harmful nematodes or wireworms that live in the soil by using a mustard-type cover crop. And we wanted to go a little bit more into the other benefits of using mustard, and that is that it is also good at reducing your soil compaction. So mustard's not so handy at reducing erosion control because it's a really large leaf and not a whole lot of understory on that one. And but it is a good nutrient hunter because it has a very powerful root that gets down into the soil. Not a whole lot of top matter to build into the soil, but it does help to alleviate compaction. It's just that big hardy root, and so if you have compacted soils and you need to get rid of some wireworms or whatnot, then this is a definite option for you that's available that would fall under organic certifications, but also falls under the less work for you certification, which I think is more important actually, because we want to make sure that you can get out there and get the jobs that you need to get done. All right, so if you're looking at another one, turnips are a great one for soil compaction, alleviating soil compaction. When you are using any of the ones we're going to talk about, your mustards or turnips, you need to make sure that you recognize that you have to let the plants decay into the soil. And there's a bit of an odor that goes with that. So if you have a sensitivity to pungent, really spicy odors, it's a very unique scent, but it's very powerful for a couple of months. So if you want something that's a low odor, it's like right next to your house or next to your neighbor's house, these might not be the best option for you. But it's not terrible. But you just do need to be aware of it. And the radishes also, they have another scent to them as they decay back into the soil. But the radishes are the ones that are going to give you the best alleviation of soil compaction. And they're not your typical garden radish. It's a ground radish. It grows a lot deeper down into the soil. You want to give us a little more on that one?
Yeah. Sometimes people call them tiller radishes, sometimes oilseed radish. That type of radish, the till radishes have the oilseed radish, a taproot. They get real. I've seen them 2.5, maybe 3 feet deep, real thick, probably a good 6-inch, 8-inch diameter on these roots. I mean, they're big monsters, and they will just penetrate into the ground, depending on what the compaction level actually is. But what happens with these is you want to plant them fairly early in the summer, maybe even late in the spring, but they will die when winter hits them. And once they start decomposing, they basically turn to mush. And that big radish root will start decomposing and will really give off a rancid odor.
And so if you're covering it with plastic, it's going to retain some of that odor, and that's when you get some of the more fumigation type aspects, because that odor it might not be friendly to us, but it can actually be harmful to certain microbes. Now, the studies that they have done, I'm not sure exactly which ones they affect, but I do know they affect nematodes, and plant-attacking nematodes and wireworms.
Yeah. And in terms of alleviating compaction, your oilseed radishes are going to be the best.
Yeah.
They're going to go the deepest. And in terms of adding a lot of organic matter, it's this book kind of rates it low because there's not a whole lot going on up top, but that root will really go deep. And I know a lot of guys that have tile that want to break up some of the compaction out west. Those oilseed radishes go straight to the tile. And then the problem is there's a big hole in their soil going all the way through into the tile, and then the water retention is just not quite there. But if you don't have tile, you're not going to have that kind of problem.
Yeah, so it all depends on, again, what your farm management goals are. Every farm is different, and you have to plan ahead for what you're doing. Now, the thing is that, so we're alleviating, I can't talk again, alleviating soil compaction is really important because compacted soils, A, don't hold water well, B, don't allow roots to grow well, and C, don't allow the microbes that can translate the non-plant available nutrients into plant available nutrients. So alleviating, I cannot say that word today, alleviating soil compaction is really important. But a lot of times, one of the ways we typically try to do it is we'll take a roller with a bunch of tines on it and we'll just roll it over the field and try to open it up. Now, that's great and all, but it really just creates a different kind of soil compaction. So instead of having it squished down from the top, it's squished out from the sides. And if you have a heavy clay soil that is going to just form a nice smooth surface, you're not really fixing the problem. When you allow a plant to do it, the plant may have that same size hole going down, but it's also going to have lots of little micro holes going off to the side. And I know no one's going to like this analogy, but it's a lot like fracking, where you have a large tunnel that you're drilling in one direction and lots of little tiny things that go off from the side of it. And so it's really making sure that you're not just having a hole poked in the ground. You're having a hole poked in the ground with lots of little tiny holes that are allowing the water to seep out into other areas. And so you're reducing your compaction in many different directions.
And air pockets, which is huge, and we don't typically talk about it. But that's the idea. You don't want a pond. You want good drainage, airflow, air movement, non-restricted root growth, and then you have wonderful crops.
That's right. So soil health is number one, and increasing your organic matter will help your soil health. Reducing your compaction will improve your soil health. And also, there's the ever-present, don't go out with a heavy piece of machinery within 3 days of a good rainstorm, because you're just going to give yourself more soil compaction. And it's going to take you at least 7 years of hard work to undo the damage you do from having to run out at one day. So unfortunately, we all know that nature doesn't always cooperate, and when things need to go, they need to go. But if you can alleviate that and reduce the amount of compaction that you have in the first place, it's going to go a long way to helping improve your overall production levels. And also, when you have healthy soil, you have fewer weed issues. Believe it or not, the weeds are designed to fix problems. So if you have a certain type of weed that keeps coming back, you have to ask yourself, why is this weed coming here, and why does it keep coming back? What is it about my management style or my soil condition that is attracting this weed to grow here?
Right. And remember, we were always talking about what your crop is, when can you get in there with your cover crop, what your issues are. And with weed suppression, again, we did talk about certain things that suppress weeds better than others. But thinking it out, you have to think about the process before you start. So sit down with the pen and paper, think about how long you're going to grow things, and stick to your plan. Don't lose the opportunity for the planting dates and planting windows, because if you don't have a good establishment of that cover crop, no matter what your purpose was, it's not going to work out quite the way it should. And what that means is you could be losing money. You could not be having the benefits that you want, or that cover crop might even turn into a weed if not managed properly. So do your research. Make sure you're growing it for the right reasons, not just because you want to put something down. But I think the key to cover crops is knowing why you want to plant them, and then making the best decision based on that goal in order to maximize your bottom line and improve your soil health. So Karen was talking about having it rain and not going out there with heavy machinery for 3 days. Think about it's not just the immediate profitability that you have to look at, but it's also the long term. So think about the long term as well. A compacted soil is really going to reduce yields, and we're talking high percentages. It's easily as much as 50% if you have enough of a compaction problem. You're going to get 50% reduction in growth. You're going to have higher pest issues. Poor drainage is going to yield to fungal problems. All kinds of problems just compound with it. So don't just think of, when you have to, but think about the long-term implications of making a decision under pressure that you're not really thinking through for the following growing season.
Yeah, and even further along down the line. So what you're going to ask yourself is when you're getting ready to go out and do something heavy machinery on a wet day, you need to ask yourself 3 questions. What will happen if I do not do this today? What will the consequence be next week if I don't do this today? Or if I do this today? And then what is the consequence 3 years down the road? Will it make a difference 3 years down the road? And so if you come up and you say, oh, well, if I don't go out today, then the cows aren't going to get fed and I might have some calf loss. Well, that's obviously not something you can deal with. But if you can't go out today because you're not going to be able to spread manure today, well, maybe, that's not going to give you that balance against this next week. It's not going to matter as much, unless you're planting right then. And then three years down the road, well, that compaction is still going to be causing an issue, whereas spreading that manure is no longer something that's on your radar.
Yeah, and let's not forget, spreading that manure isn't going to give you an immediate effect anyway. It's going to take some time to break down. It's going to take some time to you don't want to go in there when it's saturated anyway, because then you have potential for nutrient runoff. There's environmental concerns, there's compaction concerns, and there are lighter vehicles that you can use to spread urea if you're concerned about nutrients. But again, I understand not everyone's going to be able to go from conventional chemical type fertilizers, the ones that are more tied to the organic side, but you might have other options. And Karen's right. Think about 3 years down the road, what the implications might be getting out there with the wrong vehicle at the wrong time, just bad decision.
Right. And so, again, if you're facing these problems over and over again, you've got to get the manure out because it's stockpile. You have too much of it. Well, and it's an issue every year that, we've had 2 weeks of rains because, it's spring and you can't get the manure out. This time of year isn't as big of an issue, but, late winter, early spring, it is an issue. And, for our vegetable field, you want to make sure that you're getting it on in the fall, that it has time to decay down into the soil over the winter, so that not only are your plant nutrients available come springtime, but also so that your potential food contamination risks are reduced. And so if you keep having a same problem, like I said earlier, same with the weeds, if you keep having the same weed, you have to figure out how you can prevent it. So if you keep having an issue with, I've got to get out there on this date and it's always raining, well, how can you prevent that? How can you reduce the rainfall that's falling into your collection pond? How can you reduce or expand the amount of storage you have? And can I get cost share for that? And more than likely for those things, you definitely can. So just, try to figure out what are your problems, brainstorm your problems, and then start brainstorming, okay, if I deal with this 6 months before, how can I prevent those problems from happening? And, it's a whole farm management plan. Everything plays into everything else. And if you are thinking broad enough, then maybe you can find solutions that not only save you time, but also save you money.
Yeah, so let's kind of talk about ways that different soil types and why compaction even occur. We always, she said clay soils quite a bit. There's different types of soil types out there. And, if we think about sand being the larger granule type, doesn't have a whole lot of pore space, but it's very large. It doesn't really compact too much. And then you go into the loam, and then you go into the clay. Clay is by far, I mean, hundreds of times smaller than clay, maybe even more. And the problem, so when you have something that's very small and you put some weight on it, all those little small pebbles, small particles can really smash in together. So especially if it's wet, you can get these plate structures forming as you're driving over it. We always talk about organic matter and how good it is. One of the benefits of the organic matter is that it acts as a spring. But if you have heavy clays, so knowing what kind of soils you have might give you some different leeway on what you can do. Sandy soils aren't going to compact that much because they're such a large molecule. They're hard to, you can't split a particle of sand, and it's just harder to break down. But because clay is so small, and when that gets wet, it can really start to just compress. And if you don't have any spring organic matter to bounce it back, you start to forming plates, and then it'll get to the point where the compression is so great and the spaces are so limited in between all those small molecules that not even water will penetrate it.
Right. So you're looking at a potential soil issue where you're creating like a piece of china, that unfired china underneath the soil. It's squished together, and water isn't going to penetrate it. And if you think about soil size structures, there's such a vast difference. So you have your sand particles, which are basically like basketballs. Okay, we're going to use sports here. Yeah. You have basketballs, which are your sand particles. And when you put a whole bunch of basketballs in a bin, you can't fit a whole lot of them, but there's always these big spaces in between them. Now, if you go to your loam particles, you're going to look at maybe let's say a golf ball, okay? Much smaller. You're going to have much smaller spaces when you put them all in the bin. And then we're going to go to clay, and you're going to look at, those little mini marbles that you use for florist displays. That's where you're going to look at for your clay size particles. So if you look at the difference between a basketball and a little mini marble, there's a huge difference in the amount of pore space when you get them all squished together. And so if you were to put a bunch of basketballs into a bin and then press on it, yeah, actually a BB is a good one for clay particles. That's I like that one. You're going to press on it. You can squish them a little bit, but regardless of how much you squish a basketball, unless you pop it, you're not gonna lose pore space, which is why sand drains so well. And sometimes if you have a sandier soil, it's hard to keep moisture content in it. If you have your clay soil and you've got all those BBs packed in there, well, you can squish them together pretty tight, and there's not very much space in between them. When you add organic matter, it balances them all out. It improves the drainage of your BBs and it reduces the drainage of your basketballs. So it kind of helps to fill in the issues that every soil has. And it's like a mediator. It goes in and it says, well, I know that you're feeling really squashed right now, but I really think that you can work this out. And so your organic matter is just sort of your mediator. It goes in and tries to help fix the issues on both sides, whether it's too much drainage or not enough drainage. So you cannot go wrong with adding organic matter. And you really should be planning to add organic matter, whether it be green manure, animal manure, or whatever it is, to your fields every year. And that includes your pasture fields, it includes your hay fields, it includes your crop fields. Organic matter is really important to helping maintain the structure of the soil. Organic matter also is where those little microbes that live in the soil are going to start grabbing their nutrients from and making them more plant available. So you're feeding the microbes, which are the hardest workers on your farm. Even if you work from 2 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, those soil microbes are working harder than you. And there's a whole lot more of them. So you've got to keep them fed. You wouldn't let your workers come out and not feed them that day and expect them to do a good job. they're going to leave in a heartbeat if they have to work without lunch. So you have to make sure that you're feeding these microbes that are doing this huge labor for you. And so you have to keep adding that organic matter. And chemical fertilizers are not the same. The microbes can absorb those chemical fertilizers, but they're not food for them. It's sort of like subsisting on vitamins alone. And you can't just live on vitamins. You need calories to go with them. And so think of the organic matter as the meal that goes with a vitamin supplement, or if it's healthy enough and you have enough of it, you can get rid of that vitamin supplement altogether.
I never thought about it that way. That's a good analogy. I like it. And that's also organic matter and soil structure is also where we're starting to draw the line between soil fertility levels and soil health. And one of the things that with the different particles, whether it's sand, loam silt, or clay, is that clay is going to also be able to hold water better. It's going to be able to hold nutrients better, stuff like magnesium and calcium, and those are great things too. Clay is not the most evil thing there is. Sand by itself is probably harder to grow things with than too much heavy clay, but you need to manage them properly. Whereas in sand, you might not worry about the compaction as much. You really have to make sure that you're watching for compaction in clay. They both actually would be good in terms of adding organic matter too. For the clay, you're probably getting more benefit from the organic matter as having those spring-like effects prevent compaction, creating spaces in there for microbes to live in. But for the sand, that organic matter is going to prevent leaching. It's going to retain nutrients longer, so that if you do have really like a 3-day period of strong rainstorms, like pretty much we had back in May, you're not removing all that nitrogen right away from those, because where you have sand, you don't have a lot of spaces in that soil particle. It's not going to hold stuff. It's not going to, those the nitrates and the ammonias are gone. I mean, they bind to the water. You're talking about hydrogen interactions, and they're gone. With the clay, it's going to be able to hold those things better. And the more organic matter, the more it'll hold those nutrients along with the soil type that you have, the soil particles. So management comes with knowing what you have and the best way to grow things. And there's also going to be an improving drainage. 9 times out of 10, improving drainage improves your crop. There's always a few exceptions, but
like cranberries.
Yeah, and but I'm sure they don't like compacted soils or rice, and we don't really grow rice or cranberries too much around here anyway. But it's there are exceptions, but organic matter does improve drainage and all kinds of benefits. But don't neglect one or the other. Don't neglect the nutrient value of fertilizers and don't just completely disregard the organic matter, because balancing the two is the solution to a lot of problems that we have.
Right. So you've got your soil test. If you haven't, do a soil test. Dan and I would be happy to help you with that, interpreting your soil test results. And then once you know your soil test, one of the great things you get out about it that no one really pays attention to, not no one, but a lot of people kind of skim over, is the soil type you have. And that soil type really can tell you a lot about what is going on underneath the ground of your farm. Just knowing what soil type you have or that it's in your area can tell you your soil particles size, your drainage, your liming needs, and it gives us a lot of information just by that soil type, because every soil type has a different behavior, has a different balance, and knowing that is a really big deal. So while you're getting your soil tested, go out, look at your farm, look at how things are laid out. Think about your pathways. Are your pathways efficient to get you out to that area? Are you driving over your production area and thus reducing it? Because even on a hot, sunny day, you're going to get some compaction taking a 2-ton, 4-ton vehicle across it. It's really hard for soil to bounce back from that. But if you recognize, okay, this is not a place I am going to crop, then you can keep that as your travel zone and then take smaller things off to the sides into your crop production area.
And one of the things that we did talk about was if you are doing vegetables, or even if you're not, having grasses growing there, having the root structure there, the organic matter, things growing, they're really going to help keeping things from compacting immediately. Bare soil, wet bare soil, and a tire, it's probably the best way to compact your soil. You're actually you've maximized damage that way. If that's your goal, then that's why when we talk about, if you've ever built a pond, you bare soil, wet, heavy machinery, you basically knead it together, and then you create compaction to the level where it holds the water and it doesn't drain, which is great for a pond, horrible for crops.
Right. That is, yeah. So, and sometimes, when we're digging out new things, we actually wonder, well, maybe we should be building a pond instead of putting a crop in here. And, a common thing that people would do is to add sand to clayey soils. And it's not really going to do as much good as you would think. You're trying to balance out the soil types that you have. Unfortunately, one of the things a lot of people don't consider when they're adding sand to a heavy clay soil to help reduce or improve drain and reduce the water holding capacity and improve drainage is that you make concrete when you mix sand and clay together with enough water. So the question is are you creating a little concrete pad underneath your garden soil, or are you improving the drainage? Adding organic matter does not create concrete in no way, shape, or form. So adding organic matter is actually going to do a lot better than adding sand. It takes more time, it takes more effort, but isn't that how life works? The things that take the most time and effort are the most worthwhile.
Yeah, that's true. Again, probably 9 times out of 10. Much harder than that, probably.
Now, one of the things I do want to touch on before we run out of time here today is that when you are using fertilizers, the great thing that we get is rain. And rain helps to reduce any salt buildups in the soil. So, magnesium, a lot of the fertilizers we use, especially your nitrogen-based fertilizers, have a high salt content. And that salt can build up. And if anyone knows the history of Rome and Carthage, you know that salting the soil is a bad thing, okay? If you don't know that history, go to the library, grab a book, and look it up, or Google it, depending on your generation. So, but what I'm trying to get across is salt buildup is very dangerous. And if you have too many minerals in your soil, it can also reduce your production. So when you do a soil test for salt buildups, especially for high tunnels, because they don't have the rain. And if you have high salt buildup in your high tunnel, then what we recommend is to remove the plastic for a winter and just let the rain wash it. Do check your salt content and make sure you're monitoring your nutrient contents out in the field. Sometimes you have too much, sometimes you don't have enough. The question is do you know what you have?
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.